And we'll begin. We've been going through a book called Delivered into Covenant by Walter Brueggemann, going over pivotal moments in the book of Exodus. Those times that he has selected as especially important and significant. And today's chapter is chapter 13, entitled The Work Completed, the Habitat Prepared. And he's picked two verses that are nearly identical for consideration: Exodus 39, verse 32, and 40, verse 33. And they go respectively. In this way, all the work of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting was finished. The Israelites had done everything just as the Lord had commanded Moses. And then later in verse 33 of chapter 40, so Moses finished the work. So his emphasis is on the completion of what was assigned to Moses and the people. And it means all of the nuts and bolts and details to prepare a suitable habitat for God, the tabernacle, and along with all of the accoutrements that the priests would wear and all of the instruments and everything being just perfect. And they've done it. They've sojourned through the wilderness. They've been liberated, and they've done it. And if I could summarize today's pivotal verses in a modern parlance, I would say basically, and they lived happily ever after. So hooray, the story's over. Both the work of Moses and Yahweh, the work that began back in Egypt, it's now complete. And Brueggemann notes at the beginning the continued parallels between this part of Exodus and the creation accounts in Genesis 1 through 3. Specifically here, that part of that in Genesis chapter 2 that talks about how on the seventh day of creation, God rested. After the complete had occurred, it was time for God to just be and enjoy the creation. And so now Moses, the Israelites, and God have completed their liberative work together. And it's time for them to bask in the glory of the work's results and the power of God that brought it about. Now it is time for God and the people to simply be together. And this would be signified by the presence of God that would exist in the tabernacle and be a pillar of cloud by day and pillar of fire by night. All of this, Brueggemann writes on page 142 of the ebook version, the report of the finishing of the tabernacle is not simply a building report. It is rather intended to acknowledge and celebrate a major constitutive element in Israel's life, an adequate hosting of God's holiness in the midst of Israel. Because Moses and the people have been obedient, at least they have been since that kerfuffle with the golden calf incident, Yahweh, the holy God, has been created for God a fit habitat to dwell in, so that God's presence will remain fixed in the midst of the people now and forever. The very real and abiding presence of the God who overpowered, outshone, and overgloried the gods of Egypt will continue to sustain and protect the people going forward. Except, here's where the tires squeal or the tape skips, except we know that the story will continue. And as is the case with all of those other happily ever after endings, life goes on. And the happiness ebbs and flows and inevitably gives way to sorrow. And we know that Israel will experience their lion's share of hardships and sorrow going forward, but not just yet. Right now, in this moment in the life of Israel, the priests insist that they have found a way to ensure Yahweh's abiding presence with the people. In this way, we're talking about for some weeks now. It involves keeping precise liturgical practices and customs. Every instrument involved must be meticulously crafted and made to precise measurements. The priests must be made ritualistically pure. The physical building must be made just so for it to be a fit structure to host Yahweh in all of Yahweh's glory. And as we've been saying, this is meant to be a permanent arrangement. I give you a moment to take in the comic strip, and then I'll read what's on top of the slide. We have various beliefs about the end times reflected here. The snowmen are all basically voicing a very common theology, which is, the end is coming. The thing to do right now is to repent and then wait for the end. Of course, Calvin there agrees. And then you have his mom trying to basically say, hey, notice what's around you. You're taking the pleasure out of waiting for the daffodils. And the kind of theology that's expressed really more so by Calvin's mom in this comic strip and is expressed in the story is called a realized eschatology. Now, you may know, you may not know that eschatology is the branch of theology that considers the ways that God will ultimately bring about a lasting positive transformation to the created order. When I was in theology class in my undergrad, when I was 19 or 20, my theology professor said the good way to remember this word eschatology is to think of it as the kind of word you'd say after slamming your thumb with a hammer, in replace of a swear, eschatology. So take that for what it is. I never forgot it, so apparently it worked. So it's the kind of theology that when we're talking about the end times, or when we're maybe looking over the book of Revelation and trying to understand its implications in the here and now and what it means for a future, all of that theology that is developed, or the beliefs about God that have developed around those discussions, is called eschatology. And a realized eschatology emphasizes the ways that God has already restored and redeemed creation and humanity. So those who hold a more realized eschatology tend to notice what God has done already to heal and restore in the here and now, and to live into the life-giving possibilities that have been made possible by God's redemptive work in real time. But many hold an eschatological view, or beliefs about the end times, or about God in the end times, that emphasize God's final works at the end of history, and those tend to hold very little hope for humanity's transformation in the present order. So basically, we have these two dichotomies here, and I'm oversimplifying it, and very few people actually live firmly in one of these two extremes. Usually it's both and, but to make things simple to explain it, you have basically people who are waiting for heaven as an eschatological perspective, or people who will say, hey, heaven is here, and we just have to look for where it is. So that's a realized eschatology, held and juxtaposed with one that's, really looking into the future for everything to come about. So in this comic strip, the eschatology looking into the future is all the snowmen and Calvin. And then Calvin's mom here is leaning into a realized eschatology when she's like, hey, maybe we ought to just look at the daffodils that are here right now, and maybe that's part of the point. And as I said, most people live with both. And full disclosure, that's how I live. I wait for a final completion to all that is, incomplete in the world, for God to bring about its final transformation. But in the meantime, I'm aware that there are pockets of heaven around me if I have the eyes to see it. So that's realized eschatology. Why we're talking about that is because what we read about at the end of Exodus, in today's pivotal, bracketed around today's pivotal verses, is an example of a realized eschatology, one that notices what God has done to liberate the people and to bring restoration in real time, to save in real time. The people have been rescued. They have made a fitting abode for Yahweh, and now it's time to live well into the presence of the God who has sustained them, as if the good times will just roll on out forever. So it's the happily ever after, with this assumption that it's just going to continue that way, just like the end of a good fairy tale is the idea. But the thing is, we know that this happily ever after, quote unquote, in heavy air quotes, this happily ever after moment will be fleeting. And what will come next for the Israelites will be more wandering, struggle, periods of peace, sure. King David in his height, in the height of Israel's might, then periods of war, and then exile, centuries of this. And what you see to your right there is a picture of the Assyrians driving Jewish people out of a town that they have occupied. So that's coming, So this idea that the people are about to just sort of enjoy the presence of Yahweh with the right rituals and customs to remind them that God is there and to make a place for God and, keep the tabernacle complete, that those times are going to come to an end. So it leaves the question, is the realized eschatology that's expressed by way of these prescribed rituals a lie? Has God failed to see this redemptive work through? And if so, then why, if it is a lie, if the good times aren't here forever, why are we acting as if God is just taking another victory lap by way of, the priest doing the rituals and gathering at the synagogue? Why pretend that God has finally rested in the midst of the camp when the people are still midway between a hard past and a hopeful future? So is Moses settling for far less than the people deserve? And in answer to these questions, I offer the following quote from the book, page 143 of the ebook. Such a realized eschatology, one that insists on noticing what God is doing and has done in real time, It may be viewed with some suspicion, as it may lead to an excessive valuing of present arrangements to the neglect of what is yet promised by God. That is, however, important. It is, however, important to recognize the acute pastoral crisis faced by the priests in exile. And here, Brueggemann is trying to help us appreciate how this story would have been accessed centuries later when it had become clear that the good times had not lasted forever. That's my own parenthetical insert. Back to the quote. The world, creation, after the destruction of Jerusalem and its temple, was surely experienced as a world without God. Such a world would have been unbearable and intolerable. Creation was too disordered and history was too tenuous, so that it was impossible to see either creation or history as a suitable habitat for Yahweh. This priestly imagination could entertain a third option as a venue for God, not the chaos of creation or the brutality of history as a place for God, but an alternative abode, ordered, symmetrical, and beautiful. All specifications appropriate to the God who will dwell there. Now, if you're confused, bear with me. We'll get to it. I use this picture to the right as an example of the sort of thing we're talking about. And you can think of this umbrella as the rituals, the synagogue, everything that the people have done to try to make a landing strip, as it were, for Yahweh to come down, to land, to be amongst the people and live there. And it's like a pocket of stability that the order gives life in the face of the chaos, the violence, and everything else. So even when the people centuries later are remembering this moment and lamenting the fact that it did not, that moment in Israel's history when Moses has received the law, that it did not signify centuries of peace living in a land of milk and honey. But when they go back to the rituals and the practices and try to create some semblance of a synagogue or remember the temple, it's as if that order and balance comes to them in that moment, in the spark of worship, and the people are sustained in the moment. In other words, against the tide of chaos and disorder, God's people are given rituals and a physical space or tabernacle or temple by which they can reclaim the semblance of order and balance that they could not find in the world as it is. Here is an insistence that despite the chaos, violence, and decadence in the world, there are spaces where God's control and sovereignty are stubbornly insisted upon. And if you're still confused, perhaps this will help. And this is how I've helped myself in thinking of this. It's Christmas. Think about Christmas. Every year, against the tide of violence, fear, anger, hatred, hostility, and the list goes on these days. In fact, 2 years ago, we did Christmas in the parking lot in the face of pandemic and all of those things. Well, against all of those things, we still will gather. We insist upon it. Good years, bad years, we will gather in our sanctuaries. So not a tabernacle, but a sanctuary. And on Christmas Eve, we will, in those moments, insist that our help has come. We'll express this by way of liturgical practices that call us to anticipate the arrival of our Savior. And then on Christmas, we insist that our help has arrived. And we often begin those kinds of services by singing, O come, Emmanuel. And then by the end of the service, we hold our candles aloft as we sing Silent Night. And in that moment, in those moments like them, maybe even on Easter or maybe some other random Sunday throughout the year, in those moments, there's this heavy feeling that the moment we've been waiting for has arrived, that our Savior is born, that our help has arrived, the Spirit has met us in our time of struggle. And then we'll live the following days and weeks as if what were true on Christmas Day is true all of the time. God has sent us our help, and the work of God in this respect is in some ways finished. So here is one variant, a modern variant of a kind of realized eschatology. On Christmas Eve or at church on Sundays, we are insisting that the promises of God have come into our lap, into our presence, into our own space and time. That's a form of realized eschatology. For the Israelites, it was similar but different. It would work like this. At the appointed times and in the space prepared for Yahweh to live, against the tide of violence, fear, anger, hatred, hostility. The list went on in those days as well. Against all of that, Moses, Aaron, and the people would gather near the tabernacle for feast days and on other high holy days to insist that their help had come. They expressed this by way of liturgical practices that called them to anticipate the arrival of their Savior, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac and Jacob, the God named Yahweh. But also they claimed that their God had already come. And they began preparing the space, attending to the minutest detail and instruction, the priests, the utensils, the clothing, the physical space, all ritualistically clean and sanctified. And here, to draw from our own example of Christmas, here's where, we meet the week before and we put up the sconces, we put up the greens, and we put up the Christmas tree. We get the place ready for the sacred time where the peace of God will draw near. But back to the Israelites, the time comes to enact the rituals in just the right way. And in that way, they convey the solemnity of the moment and the magnitude and power of the God who has blessed them by their presence. And in that moment, there's a heavy feeling that the moment they've been waiting for has arrived. Their Savior has come. Their help has arrived. Indeed, the God who busted them out of Egypt has made their dwelling among the people. All is well with the world. And then they live in the following days and weeks as if it were true on feast days, were true all of the time. God has sent them their help. And the work of God in this respect is in some ways finished. Here is another expression of a realized eschatology. But there has often seemed a contradiction between the world described by these rituals, one of order in which Yahweh is in control, and the world as it actually is experienced. Or this is the feeling of leaving the Christmas celebration, putting away the wrapping paper and realizing that you still have laundry to do and that the world is still a hot mess. More recently, Christians have been talking about the tension between a realized eschatology and the hurt that still persists in the world in these terms. And you may have, I would bet that most of you, if not all of you in this digital space, have heard of this, describing God's coming as in the realm of God, the kingdom of God, as already and not yet. This is to say that there are ways in which God has already sent us the help we need, whilst also acknowledging that there are many places in the world that have not yet conformed to God's vision. And so back to Christmas. On Christmas, we may feel as though for a moment in time and space, all has been made well in the world, that Emmanuel has come and we've found peace. It's as if a pocket of heaven has formed around us in the sanctuary on Christmas Eve, or around the table where we celebrate our loved ones. Or that part of the Lord's Prayer that goes, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." Or the hymn that goes, "Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine." What is described by these words actually happens in holy moments where the peace of God finds us. And these moments were made possible in the midst of the people and in the midst of chaos by way of the liturgical life God described to Moses on behalf of the people. Concluding with a quote, "There is no doubt that this audacious offer of realized presence in the tabernacle meets an urgent pastoral need in the world of acute disorder. In our own world caught in such disorder, this vision of divine presence is a rich invitation to ponder what God has already finished in creation, in tabernacle, in land, and in Christ. With Wesley, we can still wait with our imperative petition that God finish, but we do so with the same precious present realities of completion already given. It is those present realities that the priestly tradition invites us to engage." So our next class will be on Thursday. I put October 5th. It should be October 6th. Sorry about that. October the 6th, next Thursday. And before you arrive, read chapter 14, the last chapter. We will not be doing a class on the appendix, although you may read it if you are so inclined. And we're back, and invite you to unmute yourselves. And I'm not going to frame it with any question. I just ask for you to dive in and tell me what you're thinking.
I sort of noticed in the larger context of how humankind, which in our history against the prehistory, the Jewish time of the Hebrew scriptures, and then the Greek scriptures with Christ up to present day, that all of these scriptures seem to also track an evolution in how we understand the eschatological reality around us, how we understand God or realize how much we don't understand about God. Did I silence everybody?
Well, no, I'm curious. Say more about what you mean.
Okay, well, let's see. How do I deal with that? Just that we're in an evolutionary stage of faith and reality and our relationship with the Almighty, the Creator, or whatever we want to call God. I consider the term God a totally inadequate term for what our reality is dealing with, because we don't and struggling to understand that, which is part of my struggle.
I see what you mean, and if I'm misrepresenting what you're saying, correct me. But if we take as a snapshot image of Israel's life, the 39th and 40th chapter of Exodus, what we have are a people that seem to believe in that moment that that God has completed the work that began back in Egypt, and that what is next for them is to maintain the tabernacle and to keep the practices that were given to Moses and to be obedient. And then God, wherever they go, will go with them. And that was their understanding. And then they were shocked to discover, after a brief, pop-up kingdom that lasted a couple generations, and they had, maybe a couple centuries, but pretty much Israel's life was one in decline, and they had to reframe. Okay, so back in Exodus, we said this God would be with us forever. Now it feels like God is gone. What were we wrong then? Are we wrong now? And they reinterpret and they reframe, and what used to be seen as rituals that would mark Yahweh's abiding presence now and forever, in the way that the people, in a very obvious way, center of the camp, pillar of fire, that Yahweh, that maybe they misunderstood, or they didn't really comprehend the way things would be for them going forward, but they could still practice these rituals to bring the feeling of God's presence into their space, whether they were in exile, whether they were still sojourning through the desert. That's why my mind went to Egypt, because for me personally, that's the way that, not yes, at Egypt, Christmas, I'm going to say. That's why my mind went to Christmas, because for me personally, Christmas is a time of year where, a lot is true of the world, a lot is nasty and negative, but for some reason, the magic of that holiday works on me, and I feel God's presence come near. And so when I say
ritual.
Yeah, so I've returned to a ritual that maybe at one time it echoes the ritual that we're reading about today, where maybe at one time rituals like it would insist that all the work that God was going to do was complete. And we just but now it's clear that there's still a lot to be done, but the ritual brings that the timeless, eternal peace of God into my lap, into my presence for a moment. I get all choked up most every Christmas Eve service, because I feel my desperate need to know that God is with us. I feel it answered. I feel that presence. And so, what you were saying, Larry, reminded me of, that belief that we needed rituals like that would acknowledge, one, the brokenness in the world, but that God, that the good gifts of God can come and meet us in our present moment, that God's kingdom, God's will be done, can be on earth as it is in heaven. That has been an adaptation through the centuries, as people have just reframed their stories and understandings of their stories. I don't know if any of that makes sense to you, but it made sense to me.
It's part of our evolution of faith.
Has anybody been to the Holy Land in Florida?
No, I've heard of it.
Oh yeah, I went there, and there was the Ark of the Covenant and the lights, and I am telling you, it just brought everything to life. So now I think all that stuff is God's laser light show way back then.
God's laser light show.
Yeah, they did such a wonderful job. It's like the Disney, going to those. It's a theme park.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really cool. And then you go to Noah's Ark and all these animals over there. But the Ark of the Covenant was especially special. I don't know whether they still have it. We went there years ago, before Hope was
Sue, you're
born.
muted.
Oh, sorry. Oh,
No,
I'm
not
not.
you,
Okay.
not you. Sue was trying to.
Sue, what,
Sue-
anyway.
It's a way to see what's only been in our brain. It brings us to real life more at the Holy Land experience.
Mhm.
When I was a kid, what brought the Ark of the Covenant to life for me, I bet you already know, was Indiana Jones. Raiders.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I know it's fun. I know it's funny, but they really did model that after what's described in the Bible. So when I was like a young kid watching that at least it's the only thing I'm sure I saw other videos that had it portrayed, but that's what sticks out to me. And I know it's sort of silly, but it really did bring that part of that story to life. Seeing it.
And the melting Nazis.
Yeah, and the melting. Don't open it. Don't open it up.
I guess when I think of the travels of the Israelites and Moses, from the very beginning, they didn't stick with God. They started going astray right away. And
Bingo.
even though they had the pillar of fire and the cloud, they had a visual presence of God, they still continued to turn their back, to forget that he's there. And even though they have eventually they have the tabernacle as well, once it's built, and all these symbolic things, but they'll still get mad because they don't have the food to eat, or they don't have water to drink. And let's go back to Egypt. At least we had pomegranates. To me, they never truly got connected with God. Only when the things were going great. And anytime something caused a bump in the road, they want to turn around and go back.
Well, I mean, we all know one another and our fellow humans. It seems like we all have a bit of that in us.
This question on page 106 says,
You're muted, Connie. Sorry, but
oh,
No.
sorry.
sorry, I just noticed Connie was talking as well. That's all.
That's okay. Go ahead, Nancy.
Well, it says, where do you see God's work already finished? Are these instances of full completion, or are they traces or foretastes of completion that come? And even though it talks about this segment being finished once the tabernacle is built, it seems to me that this work is never finished. I don't see anything that's totally complete in our world, or with chosen people or any other people.
That stage was finished. On to the next.
Even when Christ said it is finished, in a way, it was. There was now a way for our redemption. But the world goes on, and we still have to work toward that redemption. So even with Christ saying it is finished, it's really not.
Well, he gave us the tools, supposedly,
Yes.
to finish it. I just have, we as human beings don't learn from past. We don't learn from experience. We don't carry it on. We don't present it in the right way to the next generation to fully understand maybe what, has been happening over the years. It just gets dropped and lost by the wayside. It's kind of like it's continually starting over again.
That's what Christmas does. Christmas reminds us we need to do this again.
Mhm.
So far, my mind went there. I hope it was a good example to describe the sort of thing that I was trying to convey. But when you were talking, Nancy, my mind went to another analogy would be childbirth, where when every one of my children were born, there was a moment. There's have been moments since then where I felt a sense of completeness. The child is here. We have done something. Well, Kelly did most of the things.
Right to that.
Yeah. And then we have this moment where, if you want to liken it to God enjoying creation on the seventh day, where we as parents were just with the child. Now, all the work is happening now. And there's a lot of not yet, but there's a lot of already. The way that their lives have been a blessing to us in a way that is worth it if nothing else ever happens going forward. If time stops and that's the end of the story, it was already worth it. And those are the kind of complete that we can acknowledge in the work of Jesus, and the places in history, the stories in history where we see that the redemption happened in more obvious ways, and then there's all of the rest, where parenting going forward in the years to come, we're still in the thick of it, and I think all of life is lived like that, and it's important to acknowledge both. And here, Brueggemann is trying to show how Israel had baked into its religious life ritualistic practices that would bring their hearts and their minds and their bodies back to this moment where all is well, when Yahweh is with the people, give them confidence that Yahweh would always be with the people. And in a similar way, I have things like Christmas, or sometimes it's just, I wish it were every Sunday, but there are special Sundays for whatever reason. God's Spirit moves in unique ways, and I get it again, and I leave saying, God was here and we're going to be okay.
Well, I like your analogy with children, because you're never finished with children. And you never know from one minute to the next what to do, what's the right thing to do. And you just have to hope and pray that your own experiences have guided you in some way as to how to handle whatever the situation is at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And then there are the birthdays.
Hard when they're growing children and what they're doing is probably not a wise thing, and still wanting to teach them or inspire them to go a certain direction. Yeah.
I'm fortunate enough that, Josie's 9, so they haven't hit they do things as kids, but right now, last year they had to do a book where they would write a page about their heroes. And the kids did, like, there was Desmond Tutu, there was Barack Obama, there was the people you'd expect, like people you've seen, Nobel Prize winners, Martin Luther King Jr. And then the only person that wasn't a famous person, Josie put me in there. And she drew me with a stole. I was up at the church. I was in the church, and I'm pretty embarrassed by it because I'm the only parent. But I only bring it up because right now I have a lot of those sitting back and just loving it moments, because there's a lot of complete happening, a lot of all that it needs to be happening. She is all she needs to be right now. And then sometimes we're like, no, Josie, you need to stop that right now, or but there's more of that, and that's why it's important to have those rituals for humans. Their birthdays, just pause and to say you are enough on your birthday, or and the last quote there that I ended with was Brueggemann emphasizing the importance of insisting on rituals that insist on order in the face of chaos, beauty in the face of the ugly, all of the, just so that we have more moments of the complete. It's okay. In the sanctuary on a Sunday, it's okay. When I got here this morning, it was not okay. It still won't be when I leave, but right now there's enough okay in my religious life, the prayer, the order, the traditions are reminding me of that. That's kind of in a nutshell, what we're talking about. And I did appreciate what he wrote, what I didn't talk about in my presentation, about how we have gotten somewhat, I guess, sort of sloppy or careless or lackadaisical about how we gather and what we do together. And that may be fine in certain contexts when it's necessary, where people really just are turned off by things that are far too formal and ordered, but you do lose this sense of solemn sanctity that you can. I'm not sure what's the best in that regard, but I did appreciate him commenting on that.
Mhm.
I think when you have something that's weighing on you, whether it's physical or whatever, everything, but if say like, let's just say like it's an illness or something, and it's heavy on you, but if in that you can rejoice in the Lord because there are people around to help you, you've got doctors, you've got people coming in to cook your food, you know, that's even though it's bad. I don't know, for myself, you know, John and Jay both carry their guns because of the state of the world that we're in right now. But I'm at peace. I know it's all around me, but whatever happens, it happens. And it doesn't matter because the Lord is with me. He's here to protect me, whatever comes about. And so even though they're concerned, I mean, John wants me to take I won't carry a gun, but he wants me to set the tear gas stuff. He wants me to carry my tube of
Mace.
with me when I go to the grocery store, because he's afraid something will happen when I go to the grocery store. Really? You have to be afraid when you go out of the house? No, you don't, because you've got God with you and he's going to take care of you. And if something bad does happen, then I'm just going to go to where I'm supposed to be in my heavenly home.
You're living out your own version of walking with the pillar of fire in front of you, saying we go with God.
Yeah.
And I agree with you.
Yeah.
I agree with you. And that's a lovely place to I feel that this discussion, I feel like I've said all I need to say. Does anybody else have any? I don't want to shut down any further thoughts, but
before you go, I want to ask you a question.
Okay.
Did you take the milk and the bread out of the refrigerator?
I forgot. In fact, I forgot where it was, and I've been worried about that for a few days.
It's in the refrigerator. Please take it.
Okay, well, I thought I had left it. I thought I had left it like maybe in a car or in my office. I've been looking for it because I forgot. You did tell me where it'd be. It's my fault entirely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I will see you all next week at some time. When I get, I'm going to be back in the office like usual on Tuesday. I'm just going to my parents' house. Just going to celebrate my birthday with them and go to the Feast of the Hunter's Moon in West Lafayette. Has anybody ever been to that here before?
Mm-hmm.
Man, you guys got to go to this. It's fantastic.
I've heard a lot about it. I have not. There.
I've missed maybe 3 times since I was born.
So what is the context of it?
So it's in West Lafayette,
Mm-hmm.
and there's 2 days, a Saturday and a Sunday. And at that location off the Tippecanoe River, back in the early 1700s, trappers and indigenous tribes that were amicable with one another would meet there after the Hunter's Moon, which is the first full moon after the harvest, to trade and barter and to party.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's an old fort there that's been rebuilt as a model, but on the location of the old Fort Quiatnon. And so it's about a square mile. It's a big space. Think the size of the fairgrounds almost. Big space.
Mm-hmm.
Actually about that size. And it's just filled with canvas tents and a map with where to find rabbit stew, where to find buffalo stew, where to find a place where the blacksmith is making actual things in real time, kind of like Connor Prairie. And you buy all these things: flintlock rifle, leather loincloth, bear skin, pop gun, a little cork in it for the kids. The food is they all insist on the food and the music matching the Midwest at the time. So they won't let you do like a sea shanty, or we're not dressing as pirates, even if they were. You can only dress as like a river rat because maybe there would be a barge, or you could dress like an Irish person or a German person. And every one of these, there's like fife and drum corps that would correspond with real military units in the time. And these are like clubs that practice all over the country, and they come here for this event and other events like it to walk around in like colonial garb and drum and fife, and they're firing off.
That does sound like fun.
Oh yeah, they're doing it all day. They're just kind of walking around. You'll hear them in the distance, and then they'll fire off cannons all day long. Just about like every 15 minutes, there's a boom, boom, and so you just go there to eat. You eat buffalo burgers or pork chops or croquinoles, or I mean, the food is and if the food is like, if they cut corners, like there was one year where somebody was cutting their soup with Campbell's vegetable stew, and it made the papers. It was like, no, we don't let them in. Like, so
I love it.
I'm telling you, it's the best thing of its kind.
Yeah.
It's a reenactment, but there isn't like a reenactment moment where you have to sit and watch this sort of like thing happen. It's just sort of always sort of happening around you. And there's a canoe race in the tip of canoe with all like kind of, they look like birch bark canoes, but they're actually just normal canoes they're wood, but they're not. Anyway, I've given you an overview, but it's the best. If you got
obviously an attempt to be very authentic.
Yeah. And I know one of the people who's been in charge of putting it on since the 70s. And there's a reason why it stayed so consistently good. It's because they've had the same mindset, same people behind it. They used to say they won't sell any toys that have plastic in them. So there's no like plastic trinkets, nearly everything is handmade. It's just so good. And
We haven't gone because there's too many people.
Oh, really?
We don't like to go with it too many people.
It does on a nice day like this Saturday and Sunday are going to be. It is crowded.
Yeah.
Oh, but see, you were like this on Sundays. They begin with a church service at the flag. They have a flag raising ceremony, and then they have a Catholic and a Protestant church service at the beginning for all those who camp there overnight. And they go. I've never been to that part, but if you get there early enough, you can participate in the worship service and then watch them raise the flag. And when they do flag raising, all of the fife and drum corps and bagpipes and all that, they march in a row. It takes like 15 minutes. And then when the end of the day, they march back in to bring the flag down.
Well, happy birthday. How
Thank
old
you.
are you going to be?
37.
Oh, my.
Just
got
a child.
Another prime
Just
number.
a puppy, yeah.
I really like the years that I'm a prime number. Something very satisfying about prime numbers.
Mhm.
Oh.
I'm excited about that. It's little things.
Very cool. Very cool.
Also, that's what I'll be doing with my day off. I met with Jeremy yesterday. He's ready. He's excited. He's nervous, but also he's going to be fine. And I'll see you all next week.
Okay.
Sounds great. Bye.
I'm gonna
Enjoy yourself.
I'm going to leave all this stuff in about the feast.
Take care.
I am.
Sounds
I'm going to
good.
leave. I'm going to upload it with all this in. So take care,
There you go.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.